"You need to see this," James whispered, his weathered hands trembling as he held the newspaper. The gallery page showed his own wheat fields, painted in vibrant strokes of gold and amber, with a price tag that could pay off his entire farm's debt. The line of luxury cars already forming at the edge of his property told him everything was about to change. He never should have let that quiet woman with the sketchbook sit on his fence that summer evening, but now it was too late. His simple life was gone forever. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The sun beat down mercilessly on James Bennett's back as he surveyed the fields before him. Acres of wheat stretched toward the horizon, golden and swaying in the gentle breeze, a deceptively beautiful sight that masked the harsh reality of his situation. The crops looked healthy enough from a distance, but James knew better. The yield would be lower than expected, again. 3 years of drought had taken their toll, and this season's rainfall, though better than the last, had come too late to make a real difference. He pulled off his faded blue cap and wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. At 42, James looked older than his years, his face weathered from long hours under the unforgiving sun, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth, eyes that had once sparkled with hope, now dulled by years of struggle and dash. Disappointment. His shoulders, once proud and straight, now carried the invisible weight of mounting debt and uncertainty. The family farm had been in the Bennett name for 4 generations. His great-grandfather had claimed this land, broken it with his bare hands, and transformed it into one of the most productive farms in the county. James had grown up listening to stories of bumper crops and prosperity, tales that seemed like fiction now as he faced the very real possibility of being the Bennett who lost it all. "Another season like the last, and that's it," he muttered to himself, replacing his cap and turning back toward the farmhouse, a once proud 2-story structure that, like its owner, had seen better days. The white paint was peeling, the front porch sagged slightly, and one of the shutters hung crookedly from an upstairs window. Repairs that James had been meaning to make but couldn't justify spending money on when every penny needed to go back into the farm. The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. A dusty pickup truck approached, driven by his oldest friend, Ray Holloway. Ray had the adjoining farm to the west, and though he was struggling too, he had somehow managed to maintain his optimistic outlook. "How's it looking?" Ray called out as he stepped from his truck, his own cap pushed back on his head, revealing a receding hairline. James shrugged. "About as good as can be expected. Might break even this year if we're lucky." Ray clapped him on the shoulder. "Breaking even's a sight better than the alternative. Joneses over on County Line Road are selling up. Thanks for closing end of the month." James felt a chill despite the heat. The Joneses had been farming longer than the Bennetts. If they couldn't make it, he pushed the thought away. "You heard from that corporate outfit again? The one looking to buy up farmland?" Ray nodded. "Eastbrook Agricultural Investments. Slick fellow in an expensive suit came by yesterday. Offered 20% above market value. And told him my land wasn't for sale. Not at any price. Not at any price." Ray's jaw set in a stubborn line. "My grandfather would haunt me till my dying day if I sold to some corporation that's going to turn this into one big industrial operation." He paused, studying James's face. "They been to see you yet?" James nodded. "Last week, made the same offer, and you told them to take a hike, right?" When James didn't immediately respond, Ray's eyes widened. "James, you can't be serious." "I haven't decided anything," James said defensively. "But I've got to be practical, Ray. The bank's not going to wait forever. Loan payments due end of harvest, and if I can't make it—" He trailed off, the unspoken consequences hanging in the air between them. "You'll make it," Ray said firmly. "Weather forecast says perfect conditions for the next few weeks. That'll help bring in a decent crop." James wished he shared his friend's confidence. "Maybe. Look, I've got to get the irrigation system checked before dark. Was there something specific you needed?" Ray hesitated. "Actually, yeah. Combine's acting up again. Thought maybe you could take a look at it tomorrow. You always had a better ear for those engines than me." Despite his mood, James smiled. "Sure. I'll come by in the morning." After Ray left, James walked slowly toward the barn where his equipment was stored. The massive red structure had been built by his grandfather, and unlike the house, it was in good repair. James couldn't afford for his equipment to break down, so the barn got whatever maintenance was needed, even as the house continued to deteriorate. Inside, the temperature dropped several degrees, the space sheltered from the direct sun. James ran his hand along the side of his tractor, an older model but meticulously maintained. It had been his father's pride and joy, purchased the year before the accident that had left James, at just 23, suddenly responsible for the entire operation. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Land is the only thing that lasts, son. Take care of it, and it'll take care of you." But his father hadn't faced the changing climate patterns or the rising costs of everything from seed to fuel. He hadn't watched as large agricultural corporations slowly bought up struggling family farms, turning what had once been a community of independent farmers into a patchwork of corporate holdings. James worked methodically through his checklist, losing himself in the familiar routine of maintenance and preparation. By the time he finished, the sun was starting to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the farmyard. He stepped out of the barn, locking it behind him, and paused to watch as the setting sun bathed his wheat fields in a golden glow. It was beautiful, he had to admit. Despite everything, despite the worry and the stress, and the knowledge that it might all be gone soon, the sight of his fields at sunset still had the power to take his breath away. For a moment, he allowed himself to see the land through his father's eyes, to feel the connection that had sustained generations of Bennetts. The sound of an approaching vehicle broke the spell. James turned, expecting Ray returning for some reason, but instead saw an unfamiliar compact car coming slowly up the drive. It stopped a respectful distance away, and a woman emerged, looking somewhat uncertain. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a light blue button-up shirt, casual but neat. Nothing about her suggested why she might be visiting an isolated farm at sunset. "Can I help you?" James called, starting toward her. The woman smiled, a quick, nervous gesture. "I hope so. I'm sorry to intrude." Her voice was soft but clear, with an accent James couldn't quite place. "My name is Claire Winters. I was driving by and—" She gestured toward the fields. "The light on your wheat fields is absolutely stunning right now. I'm an artist, and I was wondering if you would mind if I did some quick sketches? I won't trespass on your fields or anything. Just sit by the fence if that's—" "All right." Of all the things James might have expected, this request wasn't one of them. He stared at her for a moment, trying to process the odd request. "An artist? Here? You want to draw my fields?" he repeated. Claire nodded, looking a bit embarrassed now. "I know it sounds strange, but I'm working on a series of landscapes, and the way the light is hitting your wheat right now is exactly what I've been looking for." She reached into her car and pulled out a leather satchel. "I promise I won't be any trouble. Just half an hour or so while the light lasts." James hesitated. On one hand, he had work to do, and entertaining random artists wasn't on his agenda. On the other hand, her request was harmless enough, and there was something in her expression, an earnestness that was hard to refuse. "I suppose it's all right," he said finally. "Just stay by the fence line. The field closest to the road is fine, but don't go wandering into the others." Relief and delight transformed her face. "Thank you so much. I promise I won't be in your way." She pulled a small sketchbook from her satchel and gestured toward the wooden fence that ran along the edge of the front field. "I'll just be over there, if that's okay?" James nodded, still somewhat bewildered by the entire interaction. "That's fine." He watched as she walked quickly to the fence, settled herself on a flat section of the top rail with surprising ease, and opened her sketchbook. Within moments, she was completely absorbed, her pencil moving rapidly over the page as she glanced between her book and the fields beyond. Shaking his head, James turned back toward the house. He had bills to review, a depressing task he'd been putting off all day. As he climbed the porch steps, he glanced back once at the stranger perched on his fence. her silhouette dark against the golden fields beyond. An odd encounter, but harmless enough. By tomorrow, he would have forgotten all about Claire Winters and her sketchbook. The bills were just as bad as James had feared. Sitting at the kitchen table, he sorted them into piles. Those that had to be paid immediately, those that could wait until after harvest, and those that would have to be ignored entirely for now. The last pile was growing larger every month, a fact that kept him awake at night. He was halfway through writing checks for the most urgent bills when a knock at the front door startled him. Frowning, he got up and made his way through the living room. Through the screen door, he could see Claire Winters standing on his porch, her satchel slung over her shoulder. "I just wanted to thank you before I left," she said when he opened the door. "The light was perfect. I got some really good preliminary sketches." James nodded, unsure what to say. Art was as foreign to him as farming probably was to her. "Glad it worked out," he managed. Claire hesitated, then asked, "Would it be terribly imposing if I came back tomorrow? The sunset here really is exceptional, and I'd like to do some more detailed work, maybe with color next time." James was surprised by the request. "You want to come back? If that's all right. Same time, just before sunset. I won't be any trouble, I promise." He should say no. He had work to do, and he didn't need some city artist hanging around. But something in her expression, a mix of hope and passion for her work that felt oddly familiar, made him nod. "I suppose that would be fine." Her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." She turned to go, then paused and looked back at him. "I didn't catch your name." "James." "James Bennett." "Thank you, James Bennett," she said with a smile. "See you tomorrow." As her car disappeared down the drive, James shook his head, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. But as he returned to his bills, he found himself slightly less depressed than before. There was something strangely validating about someone finding beauty in his struggling farm. Even if it was just some passing artist who would move on to more interesting subjects once she'd filled a few pages of her sketchbook. The next evening, true to her word, Claire returned. This time she brought a folding by stool and a larger sketchbook, along with a small wooden case that James assumed contained her art supplies. He was checking the irrigation lines in the field closest to where she had set up, and he found himself occasionally glancing in her direction. She worked with intense concentration, seemingly oblivious to his presence or anything else around her. There was something almost mesmerizing about her focus, the way she would stare at the fields for long moments before turning to her sketchbook and working with quick, sure movements of her hand. After about an hour, curiosity got the better of him. He walked over to where she sat, stopping a respectful distance away. "How's it going?" Claire looked up, blinking as if coming out of a trance. "Oh, good, really good. The light here is incredible." She glanced back at the fields. The way it catches on the wheat, turning it all these different shades of gold and amber. It's perfect for what I'm trying to capture. Despite himself, James followed her gaze. He'd seen this view thousands of times, but trying to see it through her eyes. He had to admit, there was something special about the way the setting sun transformed his ordinary fields into something almost magical. The wheat seeming to catch fire with golden light, while lengthening shadows created patterns of dark and light across the rolling landscape. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her sketchbook. Claire hesitated for just a moment, then turned it toward him. "It's just preliminary work, getting the composition and basic colors right. The finished piece will be much more detailed." James wasn't sure what he had expected, perhaps a realistic rendering of exactly what lay before them. Instead, he found himself looking at an explosion of color and movement. Though he could clearly recognize his fields, she had somehow captured not just their appearance but the feeling of them, the way the wheat moved in the breeze, the warmth of the late afternoon sun, the vastness of the sky above. It was his farm, but transformed, seen through eyes that found wonder in what he had come to take for granted. He struggled to find the right words. "It's really something." Claire smiled, seeming pleased by his reaction. "It's just a start. I'm trying to capture the essence of these moments when natural light transforms the ordinary into something extraordinary." She looked back at the fields. "Your land has perfect conditions for what I'm trying to do with this series. James felt an unexpected surge of pride at her words. The fields have been better. We've had drought conditions the last few years. I can see that, she said, surprising him. There's a certain resilience in the landscape. Signs of stress, but also endurance. It adds character, depth. She pointed to an area of her sketch where darker colors swirled among the golds. That's what I'm trying to capture there. James stared at her. This woman, this stranger, had in one glance seen what he lived with every day, the struggle and perseverance that defined not just his fields but his life. And somehow, on paper, she had made it. Beautiful. You're welcome to come back, he found himself saying, if you need more time with the light and everything. Claire looks genuinely grateful. Really? That would be wonderful. This series is important to me, and your fields are perfect. Would it be all right if I came for the next few evenings? Maybe in the early morning too, if that's not too intrusive. The light is completely different then. That would be fine, James said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. I'm usually up at dawn anyway. And so began a strange routine. Claire would arrive at dawn, set up her stool by the fence, and work for a couple of hours as the rising sun bathed the fields in soft, rosy light. She would leave mid-morning, then return in the late afternoon to catch the golden hour before sunset. Sometimes James would be working nearby. Other times he would be elsewhere on the farm, but he always made sure to check on her at least once during each session, gradually overcoming his natural reserve to ask questions about her work. On the third day, as they stood side by side looking out over the fields, Claire asked, "Had you always been a farmer, James?" The question caught him off guard. "Yes. Fourth generation on this land." Claire nodded, studying the horizon. "It shows. There's a deep connection here. You can feel it." James looked at her sharply, but her expression was thoughtful, not mocking. "It's not as romantic as people think," he said. "Farming's hard work, and these days it's a struggle just to break even." "I didn't mean to idealize it," Claire said quickly. "I just meant there's history here. Care. He comes through in the landscape." She gestured toward the fields. The way the rows followed the natural contours of the land, the careful transitions between different areas. It's not accidental. It's cultivated, in the true sense of the word. James had never thought about his farm in those terms. He'd always seen the practical side, the work, the worry, the endless cycle of planting and harvesting. To hear someone describe it as a kind of art was strange, but not entirely unwelcome. "What about you?" he asked. "Have you always been an artist?" Claire smiled. "In some ways, yes. I drew constantly as a child. But I took a detour first, got a practical degree in business, worked in an office for a few years." She looked down at her hands, slender fingers stained with pigment. "It took me a while to admit to myself that this was what I was meant to do." "And you make a living at it? With art?" James couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "Now I do," she said. "It wasn't easy at first. I lived on ramen noodles and hope for a few years. But things picked up eventually." There was something she wasn't saying, James thought. Some modesty or reticence that made him suspect her success was greater than she was letting on. But he didn't press. Everyone had the right to their privacy. As the days passed, James found himself looking forward to Claire's visits. She brought a different perspective, a reminder that there was still beauty to be found in his struggling farm. And she was easy to talk to. A good listener who seemed genuinely interested in his work and the challenges he faced. On the fifth evening, dark clouds gathered on the horizon as Claire worked. James, watching the sky with a farmer's instinctive weather awareness, saw the storm building long before the first distant rumble of thunder. "You should pack up," he called to Claire. "Storm's coming in fast." Claire looked up, startled, then at the darkening sky. "Ow! I didn't notice." She began hastily gathering her materials. But the wind was picking up, blowing loose papers from her sketchbook. James hurried over to help, catching a sheet that was about to blow away. As he handed it back to her, fat raindrops began to fall, quickly increasing in intensity. "Come on," he said, helping her collect the last of her supplies. You can wait it out in the house." They ran for the farmhouse as the rain came down in earnest, reaching the porch just as lightning cracked across the sky, followed immediately by a deafening boom of thunder. "That was close," Claire gasped, setting down her materials and pushing wet hair from her face. "Too close." James agreed, looking back toward the fields with concern. Summer storms could be violent in this region, and more than one farmer had lost crops to hail or flash flooding over the years. Inside, James found some clean towels and handed one to Claire. "Here, kitchen's through there if you want some coffee to warm up." As Claire dried her hair, James put on a pot of coffee and checked the radar on his ancient desktop computer. The storm cell was intense, but moving quickly. It should pass within an hour. "It doesn't look like it will last too long," he said as Claire entered the kitchen, her hair damp but no longer dripping, her clothes clinging slightly to her slender frame. He suddenly became aware of the house's shabby condition. The worn furniture, the chipped countertops, the general air of faded comfort that came from focusing all available resources on the farm rather than the home. If Claire noticed, she gave no sign. "I'm sorry to impose," she said, accepting the mug of coffee he offered. "It's no trouble." James leaned against the counter, cradling his own mug. Through the window, they could see the rain coming down in sheets, driven sideways by gusting wind. Not exactly ideal conditions for painting. Claire laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "No, not really." She sipped her coffee, looking around the kitchen with interest. James followed her gaze, seeing the room through her eyes, the mismatched chairs around the sturdy oak table, the faded curtains, the collection of well-used tools hanging from hooks near the back door. On the wall hung several framed photographs, family pictures spanning generations. Claire moved closer to examine them. "Is that you?" she asked, pointing to a photo of a young man standing proudly next to a new-looking tractor, an older man with his arm around the youth's shoulders. James nodded. "Me and my dad, when I was about 19. That was his pride and joy, that tractor. Still runs, believe it or not." "You look happy," Claire observed. "We were." James felt the familiar pang that always accompanied memories of his father. That was before the accident. Claire turned to him, her expression softening. "I'm sorry. What happened?" James rarely spoke about this with anyone, certainly not with near strangers. But something about Claire's quiet attention made it easy to continue. "Farm accident. Dad was working on the combine. Something went wrong, and—" He shook his head. "I was away at college, agricultural sciences, came home for the funeral and never went back. Someone had to run the farm." "That must have been incredibly difficult," Claire said softly. James shrugged, uncomfortable with sympathy. "It's the way things go sometimes. Dad would have done the same for his father." He glanced out the window, where the rain was beginning to slacken. "Looks like it's letting up. Storm's moving east." Claire accepted the change of subject gracefully. "That's good. I should probably head back to town soon. I've taken up enough of your time." "It's no trouble," James said again, and was surprised to realize he meant it. Claire's presence was unexpectedly comfortable, her interest in his farm genuine rather than sentimental or condescending like some city people who romanticized rural life without understanding its realities. As the rain stopped and watery sunshine broke through the clouds, James walked Claire to her car. The air smelled fresh and clean, the dust washed away by the storm. "Will you be back tomorrow?" he asked, surprised by how much he hoped the answer would be yes. Claire hesitated. "Actually, I think I have what I need for now. The preliminary studies are complete." She must have seen something change in his expression, because she added quickly, "But I'll be back in a few weeks, if that's all right, to see the fields in different conditions, maybe as the harvest gets closer. If you don't mind." "Of course not," James said, ignoring a strange sense of disappointment. "You're welcome any time." Claire smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thank you, James, for everything. Your farm is very special." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small sketchbook, different from the one she'd been using for her studies. "I wanted to get you this, just a small thank you for your hospitality." James took the book, opening it to find a series of small, exquisite drawings of his farm, not just the wheat fields but the barn, the old oak tree by the driveway, even the farmhouse itself, rendered with such care and attention to detail that it took his breath away. "Claire, I can't accept this," he stammered. "These must have taken hours." "Please," she said. "I want you to have them. You've been so generous with your time and your land. It's the least I can do." Before he could protest further, she had climbed into her car and started the engine. "I'll see you in a few weeks, James. Take care of yourself." As her car disappeared down the drive, James stood holding the sketchbook, feeling as if something significant had just happened, though he couldn't have said exactly what. In the days that followed, James found himself thinking about Claire more often than he would have expected. He kept her sketchbook on the kitchen table and would flip through it in the evenings, marveling at how she had captured the essence of his farm with such sensitivity and skill. It was his home, but seen through fresh eyes, its beauty and dignity restored. The routine of farm work soon reasserted itself, however, and as the days stretched into weeks with no sign of Claire, James began to wonder if she had simply moved on to more interesting subjects, her promise to B.A. returned just a polite fiction. Nearly a month after her last visit, James was in town picking up supplies when he passed the small local gallery on Main Street. Something in the window caught his eye, and he stopped dead in his tracks. There, displayed prominently, was a painting that was unmistakably of his wheat fields at sunset, the golden light captured with such vividness that he could almost feel the warmth of the sun on his face. Without thinking, he entered the gallery, a place he had passed hundreds of times but never gone into. The interior was cool and quiet, the walls lined with artwork, but James had eyes only for the painting of his fields. Up close, it was even more extraordinary. Claire had transformed his everyday view into something magical, the wheat a sea of gold and amber, the sky a symphony of colors from deep blue to fiery orange. But what struck him most was how she had captured the feeling of the place, the sense of space and light and history that he felt every day without consciously acknowledging it. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said beside him. James turned to see a middle-aged woman in elegant clothes, the gallery owner, he presumed. "Claire Winters is one of our most exciting contemporary landscape artists. This is from her new series, Heartland. It just came in yesterday." "How much is it?" James asked, not because he could possibly afford it, but because he was curious. The gallery owner smiled apologetically. "I'm afraid this one has already sold. We had a waiting list for pieces from this series, and this one was claimed within hours of arriving. But we do have a few more of her works if you're interested." James shook his head, still staring at the painting. "No, thank you. I was just admiring it." As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a small placard next to the painting. He leaned closer to read it. "Golden Hour, Bennett Farm, by Claire Winters. Oil on canvas, 36 by 48 inches. She had named him, his farm, right there for anyone to see. James felt a confusing mix of emotions, pride and shock, and a strange sense of exposure, as if something private had been made public without his knowledge or consent. Outside, he sat in his truck for several minutes, trying to process what he had seen. Claire Winters wasn't just some amateur artist. She was apparently well known enough that her work sold immediately at prices he hadn't even dared ask about. And she had been sitting on his fence, sketching his fields, without a word about who she really was. Part of him felt foolish, even exploited. But another part, the part that had seen the beauty she had found in his struggling farm, couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Those were his fields, his land, transformed by Claire's vision but still recognizably, unmistakably, his. He was still sitting there when his phone rang. It was Ray, his voice excited and a bit confused. "James, there's a fancy car parked at your place. Guy in a suit looking around. You selling up after all?" James frowned. "No. I'm in town." "What's he doing?" "Just looking, far as I can tell. Taking pictures with one of those professional cameras. Didn't go in the house or anything. Just walking the perimeter, looking at the fields." "I'll be right there," James said, starting his truck. When he arrived home 20 minutes later, the fancy car, a sleek black luxury sedan, was still parked in his drive. A man in an expensive suit was standing at the fence line, looking out over the fields, much as Claire had done. James approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man turned, not startled but as if he had been expecting James. "Mr. Bennett? I'm David Chen from the Westbrook Gallery in Chicago." He extended a hand, which James shook automatically, his mind racing. "Chicago? I'm a collector," Chen continued. "I'm interested in landscapes that have been featured in important contemporary works. I saw Claire Winter's Golden Hour at her gallery showing last week, and I had to see the real thing for myself." He gestured toward the fields. "It's even more impressive in person. The light, the scale, she captured it perfectly." James stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "You came all the way from Chicago to see my farm because of a painting?" Chen nodded, his expression earnest. "Ms. Winter's Heartland series is being called her most significant work to date. The art world is taking notice in a big way." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to James. "I'd be interested in talking to you about allowing me exclusive access to photograph your property in different seasons and conditions. I'm working on a book that juxtaposes the real landscapes with the artistic interpretations that have made them famous. Of course, I'd compensate you for your time and access." James took the card automatically, feeling as if he had stepped into someone else's life. "I need to think about it," he managed. Chen smiled understandingly. "Of course. Please call me when you've decided. And thank you for creating such a beautiful canvas for Ms. Winters to work with. The relationship between artist and landscape is a special one." With a nod, he returned to his car and drove away, leaving James standing in his driveway, business card in hand, wondering what exactly was happening. Over the next few days, there were more visitors. Not many, just one or two each day, people who had seen Claire's painting and wanted to see the real thing for themselves. They were by, respectful, staying by the road, taking pictures from a distance, but their presence was unsettling. James had lived most of his life in relative isolation, the farm's remote location ensuring privacy. Now, strangers were appearing, admiring his fields as if they were an attraction rather than a working farm. A week after his encounter with David Chen, James was fixing fence posts when the familiar sound of Claire's compact car coming up the drive made him straighten up. She parked and got out, looking somewhat anxious as she approached. "James," she said, stopping a few feet away. "I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner. The exhibition preparations took over everything." James leaned on the post-hole digger, studying her. "You didn't tell me who you really are," he said, his tone neutral rather than accusatory. Claire's expression was a mix of guilt and apprehension. "Would it have mattered?" "If I had said, 'Hi, I'm Claire Winters, a fairly successful artist, and I want to paint your fields,' would you have reacted differently?" "I might have," James admitted. "But that wasn't for you to decide." "You're right," Claire said after a moment. "I should have been honest about who I was and what I was doing. I'm sorry." She hesitated, then added, "If it helps, I never expected the paintings to get the response they did. I knew they were good, the best work I've done, but the way people have reacted—" She shook her head. "It's been overwhelming, even for me." James considered this. "I saw one. In the gallery in town. You named me in it." "I hope that's okay," Claire said quickly. "I wanted to give credit where it was due. This land, your farm, it was as much a collaborator in those paintings as I was. I couldn't have created them without your permission and generosity." The sincerity in her voice was hard to doubt. James found his irritation fading, replaced by curiosity. "How many are there? Paintings of my farm?" "7 in total," Claire said. "Different times of day, different perspectives. They're the centerpiece of my new exhibition, Heartland. It opened in Chicago last week." She paused, then asked hesitantly, "Have you had visitors? People coming to see the farm?" James nodded. "A few. One wanted to pay me for the right to take photographs." Claire winced. "I'm so sorry, James. I never meant to disrupt your life or invade your privacy. I should have anticipated this might happen. She looked genuinely distressed. What can I do to make it right? James hadn't expected this question, and he found he didn't have an immediate answer. What did he want from Claire Winters, successful artist who had put his struggling farm on display for the world to see? I'm not sure, he said honestly. This is all new territory for me. Claire nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course. It's a lot to process. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a large envelope. I brought something for you. It's not compensation, exactly, but… She handed him the envelope. I thought you should have this. Inside was a glossy exhibition catalog. On the cover was the painting James had seen in town, his golden wheat fields at sunset. Opening it, he found high-quality reproductions of all 7 paintings Claire had created of his farm, along with an essay about the series and the artist. One paragraph caught his eye. In Heartland, Winters has captured not just the visual beauty of America's agricultural landscape, but its deeper significance as a site of labor, history, and identity. The Bennett Farm paintings, in particular, reveal a profound collaboration between human and natural forces, a working relationship that has shaped the land over generations while respecting its intrinsic grace, character, and rhythms. James looked up to find Claire watching him anxiously. It's beautiful, he said simply. You made my old farm into something important. Relief washed over her face. It is important, James. That's what I was trying to show. The dignity of the place, its history, the care that's gone into it. She hesitated, then added, the exhibition has been very successful. All 7 paintings from your farm sold within the first few days of the opening. For how much? The question escaped before James could stop himself. Claire looked uncomfortable. They sold for significant amounts. The largest one went for just over $80,000. James felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. $80,000 for a painting of his fields. Fields that might not even be his much longer if he couldn't make the loan payment. I see, was all he could manage. Claire must have read something in his expression, because she said quickly, James, I want to offer you something. A portion of the proceeds from the sales. It's only fair. Your land was essential to these works, and I never would have created them without your generosity. James stiffened. I don't want charity. It's not charity, Claire said firmly. It's recognition of your contribution. In the art world, we call it a collaboration. The paintings wouldn't exist without both of us playing our parts. She met his gaze steadily. Please, let me do this. James wrestled with his pride. The money could save the farm, could give him breathing room, could end the constant anxiety about making ends meet. But accepting it felt dangerously close to admitting defeat, to acknowledging that his family's legacy was worth more as a pretty picture than as working farmland. I need to think about it, he said finally. Claire nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. She hesitated, then added, I'm staying at the inn in town for a few days, working on some companion pieces for the exhibition. I'd like to come back, maybe do some more sketching, if that's all right. Despite everything, James found himself nodding. That would be fine. After Claire left, James sat on his porch for a long time, leafing through the exhibition catalog and trying to reconcile the farm he saw every day with the luminous landscapes Claire had created. Gradually, a realization formed. Claire hadn't changed his farm, had added nothing that wasn't already there. She had simply seen it, really seen it, and shown others what she saw. The beauty, the dignity, the struggle, the perseverance. It was all there in every brushstroke, every subtle shift of color and light. That evening, James called Ray and asked him to come over. He needed to talk this through with someone who understood farming, someone whose judgment he trusted. Ray arrived with a 6-pack of beer, and they sat on the porch as the sun set over the fields. The very view that had captivated Claire. James showed Ray the catalog, explained about the painting selling for tens of thousands of dollars, and Claire's offer. Take it, Ray said immediately. For God's sake, James, it's not charity, it's dumb luck. Most farmers would give their right arm for this kind of opportunity. But what if it changes things? James asked, voicing the fear that had been lurking beneath the surface of his thoughts. What if people start showing up all the time? What if I can't just be a farmer anymore? Ray took a swig of his beer. Change is coming whether you want it or not. Maybe not this particular change, but something. You said yourself the farm's hanging by a thread. At least this way, you get to keep the land, keep doing what you love, just with less worry about making the bank payments. James knew his friend was right, but the prospect was still daunting. I don't know the first thing about art or artists or any of this, he said, gesturing with the catalog. So learn, Ray said simply. You learned how to run this entire farm when your dad died. You can learn about this too. He pointed to one of the paintings in the catalog. Besides, she's captured something true here. You can feel it. That's your land, your work. Be proud of it, and take the damn money. The next day, James drove into town and asked at the inn for Claire. The desk clerk directed him to a small garden area at the back, where Claire sat sketching, a cup of coffee cooling beside her. She looked up as he approached, surprise and pleasure crossing her face. James! I didn't expect to see you so soon. I've been thinking about your offer, he said without preamble. I'd like to accept it, but I have a condition. Seeing her expectant expression, he continued. I want to understand what all this means. The art world, exhibitions, collectors showing up at my farm. I need to know what I'm getting into. Claire's face broke into a wide smile. I'd be happy to explain everything, and I completely understand your concerns. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. Have a seat. We can start right now if you like. Over the next hour, Claire gave James a crash course in the contemporary art market, explaining how galleries worked, how prices were set, what collectors looked for, and what it might mean for him and his farm to be associated with a successful art series. The interest might die down after a while, she warned. But for now, you should expect some visitors. Mostly respectful, but persistent. We could put up some signage, make it clear which areas are private and which are open for viewing. James nodded, trying to absorb it all. And the money? How would that work? I'm proposing a 30% share of the sales, Claire said. That's standard for a significant collaboration like this. The money would come as a lump sum payment, and from a tax perspective, it would be classified as licensing income for the use of your property in the creation of fine art. It all sounded very formal and businesslike, which paradoxically made James more comfortable. This wasn't charity, it was a transaction, one that recognized the value of what he had contributed. All right, he said finally. I accept your offer. Thank you. Claire looked genuinely relieved. No thank you, James. These paintings wouldn't exist without you and your farm. She hesitated, then added, there's something else. The Chicago Museum of Contemporary Art wants to do a special installation of the Heartland series. They've asked if they could send a film crew to document the actual landscapes. It would mean people here on the farm for a day or two, filming in different conditions. I told them I needed to discuss it with you first. James felt a flash of anxiety at the thought of a film crew invading his space, but he pushed it down. This was part of the new reality he was accepting. When would they want to come? In about 2 weeks, if possible. They're aiming to open the installation next month. I suppose that would be all right, James said slowly, as long as they stay out of the way of the farm work. Claire nodded eagerly. Of course. They'll work around your schedule completely. As James drove home, he felt a strange mix of emotions, excitement and apprehension swirling together. His life was changing in ways he never could have anticipated. All because he had allowed a stranger to sit on his fence and sketch his fields. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The money from Claire arrived, a sum that made James stare at his bank account in disbelief. It was enough to pay off the most pressing debts, make needed repairs to equipment, and still have a cushion for the coming seasons. For the first time in years, he could breathe without the constant weight of financial anxiety pressing down on him. The film crew came and went, professional and efficient, capturing the farm in dawn light, midday brightness, and the golden hour at sunset. They interviewed James briefly, asking about the history of the farm and his reaction to seeing his land transformed into art. He found himself more articulate than he would have Vergoff. expected. Pride in his family's legacy, giving weight to his words. Visitors continued to arrive, a steady trickle rather than a flood, but enough that James decided to take Claire's suggestion and put up some signs, marking a designated viewing area by the road and kindly requesting that people respect the working nature of the farm. Most did, though occasionally someone would attempt to wander into the fields for a better photo opportunity, requiring a firm but polite redirection. Claire came and went, sometimes sketching, sometimes just talking with James about his work or her own. He found himself looking forward to her visits, the way she saw the world making him see his own surroundings with fresh eyes. One evening, as they sat on his porch watching the sunset, Claire said, "The museum installation opens next week. Would you like to come? They're flying me out for the opening, and I could arrange a ticket for you as well." James's immediate instinct was to refuse. Chicago was a different world, one he had no place in. But curiosity got the better of him. "I'd like that," he said, surprising himself. "If it wouldn't be too much." "Trouble." Claire's face lit up. "No trouble at all. I'd love to have you there." And so, a week later, James found himself in a suit he hadn't worn since his father's funeral, standing in a vast, white-walled gallery space in the Chicago Museum of Contemporary Art. Surrounded by people in fashionable clothes who spoke about art in terms he was only beginning to understand. But there, on the walls, were Claire's paintings, his fields transformed but still recognizably his. The essence of his land and work captured in vivid color and light. As he stood before the largest painting, the centerpiece of the exhibition, he felt a surge of emotion he couldn't quite name, something between pride and wonder, and a strange sense of validation. "What do you think?" Claire asked, appearing beside him. She looked different here, more polished in an elegant black dress, but her eyes were the same, bright with genuine interest in his response. "It's overwhelming," James admitted, "seeing them all together like this, in this place. It makes them seem important." "They are important," Claire said firmly. "Just like the land they represent." She hesitated, then added, "There's someone who would like to meet you. A curator from the Museum of Rural Life. She's interested in doing a documentary about family farms, and your story caught her attention." Before James could process this, a woman approached, introducing herself as Dr. Eleanor Wright, curator of the Museum of Rural Life. She spoke passionately about the importance of documenting America's agricultural heritage, the challenges facing family farms, and how James's story, brought to light through Claire's art, represented a powerful intersection of art, history, and contemporary rural life. "Would you be interested in participating in the project?" she asked. "We're looking to document several farms across the country, focusing on families that have maintained their operations despite economic pressures and changing conditions." James found himself nodding. "I'd be interested in hearing more about it." By the time he returned home, James had agreed to participate in the documentary, which would involve film crews visiting the farm periodically over the course of a year, capturing the full cycle of planting, growing, and harvesting. It was yet another unexpected turn in a journey that had begun with a simple request to sketch his fields. As word spread about the exhibition and the forthcoming documentary, more people began to take an interest in Bennett Farm. A local newspaper ran a feature story highlighting the farm's history and James's efforts to maintain it against increasing odds. This led to an unexpected surge in interest from the community. A teacher from the local school called, asking if her class could visit the farm on a field trip to learn about agriculture and its connection to art and history. A regional agricultural organization reached out, wondering if James would be willing to host a workshop on sustainable farming practices. And most surprisingly, a high-end restaurant in the nearest city contacted him about sourcing wheat directly from his farm, offering a premium price for what they called artisanal, heritage grain from the famous C.A. Bennett farm fields. James found himself saying yes to these opportunities, partly for the additional income they represented, but increasingly because he saw value in sharing his knowledge and experience. Generations of Bennett farmers had worked this land, developing techniques and understanding that deserved to be passed on. The most unexpected development came 6 months after Claire's first visit, when a letter arrived from Eastbrook Agricultural Investments, the corporation that had been attempting to buy up local farms. Instead of another purchase offer, the letter outlined a different proposal, a partnership that would allow James to maintain ownership and operational control of his farm while benefiting from the company's resources and distribution networks. "They're backpedaling," Ray said when James showed him the letter. "They've seen all the attention your farm is getting, and now they want to be associated with it instead of just swallowing it up." James wasn't sure how to feel about the offer. On one hand, the partnership would provide financial stability and access to resources he couldn't afford on his own. On the other hand, it represented yet another change, another step away from the independent farming tradition his family had always followed. He decided to discuss it with Claire, who had become a trusted advisor in navigating his farm's unexpected new reality. They walked the fields together, the wheat now tall and ripening, as James explained the proposal and his reservations. "It comes down to this," he said finally. "I want to preserve what matters about this place, the history, the independence, the connection to the land. But I also need to ensure it survives, that it's still here for future generations." Claire was quiet for a moment, looking out over the fields that she had immortalized in her art. "What if there's a third option?" she said eventually. "Something that preserves the farm's independence, but gives it the support it needs?" Over the next few weeks, Claire introduced James to a network of people she knew through the art world, individuals with resources and a passion for preserving rural heritage. Together, they developed a plan for the Bennett Farm Preservation Trust, a non-profit organization that would ensure the farm remained both working and independent, while developing educational programs and artist residencies that would generate additional income and keep the farm's legacy alive. The trust launched with initial funding from several of Claire's contacts, including collectors who had purchased her paintings of the farm. Additional support came from grants focused on agricultural preservation and rural development. James would maintain operational control of the farming activities while serving as the trust's executive director, a position that recognized both his practical knowledge and his growing skill as a spokesman for CAI. Family farming. 1 year after Claire had first appeared on his farm, James stood at the edge of his fields, watching as a group of art students set up easels along the fence line. They were the first participants in the Bennett Farm Artist Residency Program, spending a month living in the recently renovated farmhand cottages and creating work inspired by the landscape. "What do you think?" Claire asked, coming to stand beside him. She had become a frequent visitor, dividing her time between her studio in Chicago and the small cottage on the farm that had been set aside for her use whenever she wanted it. James considered the question, looking out over his land. The wheat was golden and heavy, promising a good harvest. The farm buildings gleamed with fresh paint, repairs no longer deferred due to lack of funds. And most importantly, the land remained what it had always been, a working farm, productive and vital. "I think my father would be surprised," he said with a small smile. "But not disappointed." Claire nodded, understanding what he meant. The farm had changed, yes, but it had survived, adapted rather than surrendered. The land that had supported generations of Bennetts would continue to do so, its legacy preserved but reimagined for a new era. "Are you ready for the Harvest Festival next month?" Claire asked. The museum curator called again to confirm they're sending a film crew. The Bennett Farm Harvest Festival had been Claire's idea, a way to celebrate the completion of the harvest while showcasing the farm's new role as a center for both agriculture and art. The event would feature local food, music, art exhibitions, and demonstrations of traditional farming techniques, bringing together the rural community and visitors from further afield. "As ready as I'll ever be," James said. He was still getting used to the public aspects of his new role, though he had discovered an unexpected talent for explaining farming to those who had never set foot on a farm before. Ray's volunteered to demonstrate the old threshing machine his grandfather used. He's got it running again. "That's perfect," Claire said enthusiastically. "The documentary team will love that." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you. The Heartland series has been so successful that the gallery wants me to create a follow-up. I'm thinking of calling it Seasons, following the same landscape through all 4, seasons. James smiled. You know you're always welcome here, Claire. The farm is as much yours now as it is mine, in some ways. It was true, he realized. Claire had done more than capture his farm in her art. She had helped save it. Without her paintings, without the attention they had brought, without her connections and her vision for what the farm could become, he might have been forced to sell. To watch as generations of his family's work was absorbed into a corporate agricultural operation. Instead, Bennett Farm was thriving, not just as a producer of wheat, but as a living example of how traditional farming and contemporary culture could come together, each enriching the other. The fields that had once been simply his burden were now his legacy, preserved and vital. As the sun began to set, painting the wheat in shades of gold and amber, James and Claire stood side by side, watching as the art students attempted to capture on canvas what Claire had seen so clearly that first evening. The beauty, the dignity, the enduring significance of this land. You know, Claire said softly, when I first stopped here, I was just looking for a beautiful landscape to paint. I never imagined all of this would happen. James nodded. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes. He gestured toward the fields, where the wheat swayed gently in the evening breeze, catching the last golden rays of the setting sun. I'm glad you stopped that day. So am I, Claire said, her eyes on the horizon, where the sun was sinking in a blaze of color. So am I. In the fading light, the Bennett farm stood, as it had for generations, a testament to hard work, perseverance, and the unexpected ways in which beauty could transform even the most challenging circumstances. The wheat fields stretched toward the horizon, golden and proud, their image captured in paintings that hung in galleries and museums, but their reality rooted here, in this soil, under this sky. A living canvas that would continue to inspire and sustain for generations to come. The next morning, James rose before dawn, as he always had. He made coffee and stepped out onto the porch to watch the sun rise over his fields. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, a pale glow that promised another hot summer day. A movement caught his eye, a figure walking along the fence line. Claire, her sketchbook in hand, already at work capturing the changing light. James smiled, no longer surprised by her dedication or her ability to find new beauty in the familiar landscape. He walked down to join her, carrying an extra mug of coffee. She looked up as he approached, her face lighting with a smile. I had an idea in the night, she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. For the season series, I want to focus not just on how the land changes through the year, but how the relationship between the farmer and the land evolves with each season, the different kinds of work, the different challenges and rewards. James nodded, intrigued by the concept, like showing the planting in spring, the maintenance in summer, the harvest in fall, and the planning in winter. Exactly, Claire said, pleased that he understood. It's not just about how the fields look, but about the cycle of care and reciprocity between the land and those who work it. As they talked, the sun crested the horizon, flooding the fields with golden light, transforming the ordinary wheat into something extraordinary. Just as Claire's vision had transformed James's struggling farm into something more than it had been before, without changing its essential nature. Later that day, a school bus arrived, carrying the local fourth-grade class for a scheduled tour of the farm. James had prepared a program that combined agricultural education with art appreciation, showing the children how farming worked and then how Claire had captured those processes in her paintings. The children were full of questions, their curiosity refreshing and sometimes challenging. One small girl with serious eyes asked, "Were you mad when your farm got famous? Did you want to just be regular again?" James considered the question carefully. "Sometimes change is hard, even when it's good change," he said finally. "But I'm glad things happened the way they did. The farm is still a farm, but now it's also a place where people can learn and create art and understand where their food comes from." The girl nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. "My grandpa says your wheat makes the best bread in the county now." James smiled, recognizing the name of a local baker who had started sourcing grain directly from Bennett Farm for his artisanal bread. It was one of many small but significant changes that had come about in the past year, connections forming between the farm and the wider community in ways that benefited both. After the school group left, James spent the afternoon checking the irrigation system. The drought conditions that had plagued the region for years had improved somewhat, but water management remained crucial. Thanks to the Farm Trust's resources, he had been able to install a more efficient system, reducing water usage while improving crop yields. As he worked, James found himself thinking about the changes the past year had brought. The financial pressure had eased, allowing him to focus on farming well rather than merely surviving. The attention brought by Claire's paintings had opened unexpected doors, creating opportunities for the farm to diversify its activities and income streams. And perhaps most importantly, he had rediscovered a sense of purpose and pride in his work, seeing it through Claire's eyes as not just a struggle for survival, but a meaningful continuation of his family's legacy. That evening, as the setting sun once again transformed his ordinary fields into a golden wonderland, James sat on the porch with Claire, Ray, and several of the artists in residence, sharing a meal of locally produced food, including bread made with Bennett Farm wheat. The conversation flowed easily, moving from art to agriculture to local history and back again. Looking around at this unlikely gathering, James felt a deep sense of contentment. His father had always said that land was the only thing that lasts, and there had been wisdom in those words. But what his father perhaps hadn't fully articulated was that the meaning of land, its value and purpose, could evolve without being diminished. Bennett Farm was still a working farm, still producing food, still connected to the cycles of nature and the rhythms of agricultural life. But it had become something more as well, a place at intersection between different worlds, a living example of how tradition and innovation could strengthen rather than oppose each other. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared overhead, James excused himself to check on a piece of equipment he'd been repairing. In the barn, surrounded by the tools and machines that had been part of his life for as long as he could remember, he paused to look at a small framed sketch hanging on the wall. It was Claire's first drawing of his fields, the quick study she had done that initial evening, before either of them had any idea where that moment would lead. The sketch captured the essence of the place with just a few lines: the vast expanse of the fields, the subtle undulations of the land, the way the wheat caught and held the golden light. It was a reminder of how something as simple as seeing beauty in the everyday could set in motion a chain of events that transformed everything, without changing what truly mattered. James touched the frame lightly, then turned back to his work, a farmer tending to his equipment as night fell over his fields, as his father had done, and his grandfather before him. Some things changed, and some remained constant. The trick, perhaps, was knowing which was which, and having the wisdom to embrace both continuity and transformation as part of the same ongoing story. Outside, under the vast summer sky, the wheat fields of Bennett Farm stretched toward the horizon, golden even in the moonlight, their beauty now recognized and celebrated, but their essence unchanged. A living canvas, painted each season anew by the combined efforts of nature and human care. A collaboration as old as agriculture itself, and as contemporary as the art it had inspired. The next morning, James woke to the sound of rain, a gentle, steady shower that was perfect for the crops at this stage of growth. He made his coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the raindrops create patterns on the glass and listening to the soothing rhythm on the roof. His phone rang, disturbing the peaceful moment. It was Dr. Wright, from the Museum of Rural Life, calling with exciting news. The documentary about Bennett Farm had been selected for screening at a prestigious film festival, and they wanted James to attend the premiere. "It's an important platform," Dr. Wright explained. "The festival focuses on environmental and cultural issues, and your story perfectly illustrates the intersection of agricultural heritage, environmental stewardship, and cultural preservation." James agreed to attend, still somewhat amazed that people found his farm and his story so compelling. When he shared the news with Claire later that day, she wasn't surprised at all. "Your farm represents something people are hungry for," she said as they walked through the fields, checking how the wheat was responding to the morning's rain. A connection to the land, to tradition, to something authentic and meaningful. In a world where everything seems increasingly corporate and disconnected, what you're doing here resonates deeply. James considered this. I'm just farming, the same as my family's always done. Claire shook her head. No, you've done something much harder. You've adapted without compromising. You've found a way to preserve what matters while embracing change where it's needed. That's rare, and it's why people are drawn to your story. The rain had left the wheat glistening, droplets of water catching the light like tiny jewels. Claire stopped to take several photographs, explaining that she might use them as reference for the season's paintings. I want to capture how the farm looks in all weather conditions, she said. Not just the golden hour, but the rain, the morning mist, maybe even a snowstorm if I'm here during winter. You're planning to be here through the winter? James asked, surprised. Claire usually divided her time between the farm and her city studio, but winter in rural areas could be isolating, the roads sometimes impassable after heavy snowfall. Claire nodded. If that's all right, I've rented the cottage through next spring. This series is important to me, and I want to really immerse myself in the full cycle of the farm. Of course it's all right, James said, pleased at the prospect of Claire's continued presence. Their friendship had deepened over the months, built on mutual respect and a shared appreciation for the land, albeit from different perspectives. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, they discussed plans for the upcoming Harvest Festival. The event had expanded since its initial conception, now incorporating educational workshops, local food vendors, and performances by regional musicians, in addition to the art exhibitions and Gubble-eye agricultural demonstrations. We've had requests from 3 more schools about bringing classes, Claire reported. And the local tourism board wants to feature the festival in their regional guide. James shook his head, still occasionally overwhelmed by the interest in his farm. We'll need to figure out parking. The field we used last year might be too small now. It was a good problem to have, he reflected. A year ago, his main concern had been surviving another season, making just enough to keep the bank at bay for a few more months. Now, he was managing a thriving operation that combined traditional farming with education, art, and community engagement. The transformation hadn't always been smooth. There had been moments of doubt, times when James questioned whether he was betraying his family's legacy by allowing the farm to become something different from what his father and grandfather had known. But gradually, he had come to see that adapting was not the same as abandoning, that finding new ways to make the farm viable was the most faithful way to honor those who had worked the land before him. The rain continued intermittently throughout the day, a blessing for the crops, but a challenge for the artists and residents who had planned an outdoor painting session. Claire suggested they use the opportunity to study the barn instead, focusing on the interplay of light and shadow in the vast interior space. James left into it, turning his attention to administrative work that had once been a minor part of farming but now consumed several hours each week. There were grant applications to review, contracts with local businesses to negotiate, schedules for educational programs to coordinate. He had hired a part-time assistant to help with the paperwork, a local woman with a background in nonprofit management. But there were still decisions only he could make. By late afternoon, the rain had stopped, and the sun emerged, creating that magical light that had first captured Claire's attention. James stepped outside, drawn by the beauty of his fields glistening in the golden hour. He wasn't surprised to find Claire already at work, her easel set up by the fence, her brush moving rapidly as she sought to capture the ephemeral moment. What did surprise him was seeing several of the other artists scattered across the property, each focused intently on their work. One was sketching the old oak tree near the driveway. Another was painting the weathered red barn against the clearing sky. A third had positioned themselves to capture the farmhouse, with the fields stretching beyond. They were all seeing different aspects of the same place, each bringing their unique perspective and style to their interpretation of Bennett Farm. It struck James that this was a perfect metaphor for what had happened over the past year, the farm revealing facets of itself that had always been present but needed fresh eyes to be fully appreciated. He watched for a while, not wanting to disturb the artists at work, then continued on to check the wheat fields. The rain had been good for the crops, the soil moisture levels, now optimal for this stage of growth. Barring any extreme weather events, the harvest would be excellent, both in quantity and quality. That evening, as James worked on his monthly report for the Farm Trust's board of directors, he found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. If Claire hadn't stopped that day, if he hadn't allowed her to sketch his fields, if her paintings hadn't captured something that resonated so deeply with viewers, would he have been forced to sell the farm by now? Would the Bennett legacy have ended with him, the land absorbed into some corporate agricultural operation, its history and identity erased? There was no way to know for certain, but he was profoundly grateful that events had unfolded as they had. The farm wasn't just surviving. It was thriving in ways his father could never have imagined, but would, James believed, have approved of nonetheless. The land was still being worked respectfully, still producing food, still connected to the rhythms of seasons and weather. That it was also now a place of learning and creativity and community gathering only enhanced its value without diminishing its essential character. James finished his report and sent it off, then stepped outside to enjoy the evening air. The sky was clearing after the day's rain, stars beginning to appear in the darkening blue. In the distance, he could see lights in the cottage where Claire stayed and in the renovated farmhand quarters that now housed the artists in residence. He walked down to the fence line, the same spot where Claire had first set up her easel a year ago. The wheat was different now, of course, a new crop growing where the old had been harvested. But the land was the same, the horizon unchanged, the essential character of the place consistent despite the surface transformations. A quiet voice behind him said, "It never gets old, does it, this view?" James turned to find Claire standing a few paces away, her expression thoughtful as she gazed out over the fields. "Never," he agreed. "Even after a lifetime of seeing it every day." "That's what makes it special," Claire said. "The way it's both constant and always changing. The same fields, the same horizon, but different light, different weather, different seasons." She moved to stand beside him at the fence. "That's what I'm trying to capture in the new series. Not just the visual changes, but that paradox of permanence and transformation." James nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It was what farming was all about. In many ways, the annual cycle of planting and growth and harvest. The same basic process repeated year after year but never quite identical, always shaped by the specifics of that season's weather, that year's conditions, that moment in time. "I've been thinking," Claire said after a comfortable silence, "about doing an educational book to accompany the season's exhibition. Something that explains the farming techniques, the history of the land, the environmental considerations. Would you be interested in collaborating on?" "The text?" James was surprised by the suggestion. "Me? I'm not a writer." Claire smiled. "But you know this land better than anyone. You understand the work in a way I never could. We could do it as a series of conversations, perhaps, or interviews that are then shaped into narrative form." The idea was intriguing. James had become more comfortable speaking about the farm to visitors and students, but the thought of his words being published alongside Claire's artwork was both daunting and appealing. It would be yet another way to preserve and share the Bennett farming legacy. "I'd be willing to try," he said finally. "Wonderful!" Claire's enthusiasm was infectious. "I think it will add a valuable dimension to the project, hearing directly from you about what it means to work this land through all the seasons." As they walked back toward the farmhouse, discussing ideas for the book, James felt a sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The farm had evolved, and so had he, but the core remained solid, rooted in the soil his great-grandfather had first claimed, and in the values his family had always lived by. The next few months passed in a blur of activity. The wheat continued to mature, the harvest approached, preparations for the festival intensified, and the farm hosted a steady stream of visitors, from school groups to art enthusiasts to agricultural bass. Students. James divided his time between traditional farming tasks and his new roles as educator, preservation advocate, and reluctant local celebrity. The documentary film crew returned periodically, capturing the changing seasons and the various activities on the farm. Dr. Wright conducted extensive interviews with James about his family's history and his vision for the farm's future, material that would form the backbone of the film's narrative. Claire worked steadily on her Seasons series, her presence becoming such a familiar part of farm life that James would have missed her during her occasional trips back to Chicago, even if she hadn't become such a close friend. Their collaboration on the book progressed as well, with Claire recording their conversations about farming practices and the changing landscape, then shaping them into text that would accompany her paintings in the exhibition catalog. As harvest time approached, the farm buzzed with anticipation. The crop was as good as James had hoped, the wheat standing tall and golden under the late summer sun. The vintage harvesting equipment that would be demonstrated at the festival was checked and rechecked, ensuring it would operate smoothly for the public displays. Ray, who had become an enthusiastic supporter of the farm's new direction and a regular volunteer for its educational programs, arrived one morning with unexpected news. "Eastbrook's selling all their holdings in the county," he announced, as he helped James check the combine. "Word is they're pulling out of direct farming altogether, focusing on processing and distribution instead." James straightened up, surprised. "What happens to the farms they bought?" "Being sold off individually, from what I hear. Some to investment groups, but some back to local farmers." Ray grinned. "Turns out their corporate farming model wasn't as profitable as they thought it would be. Especially with all the publicity about small farms like yours. Makes their image look bad, being the corporate giant swallowing up family operations." James absorbed this information, its implications rippling through his thoughts. If Eastbrook was pulling out, they could change the dynamics of the entire agricultural community in the region. Farms that had been consolidated might return to individual ownership, potentially revitalizing the network of family operations that had once defined the area. "Have you heard what they're asking?" he asked Ray. "Market value, from what I've heard. They're not taking a loss, but they're not price gouging either. Just want a clean exit." Ray wiped his hands on a rag. "The Johnsons are already talking about trying to buy back their old place." The news added another layer of excitement to the pre-harvest atmosphere. The possibility of neighboring farms returning to family ownership aligned perfectly with the Bennett farm's new role as a model for sustainable family farming, creating potential for a broader renaissance in the local agricultural community. The day of the Harvest Festival dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for an outdoor celebration. James had been up since before dawn, making final preparations and checking that everything was in place. By mid-morning, cars were already lining up along the specially prepared parking areas, and the first visitors were making their way toward the welcome tent, where volunteers from the local historical society distributed maps and program schedules. The farm had been transformed for the day, with activity stations spread across the property. Near the barn, Ray was demonstrating the vintage threshing machine to an enthusiastic crowd. In a large tent set up near the farmhouse, an exhibition of Claire's original sketches and studies for the Heartland series drew art enthusiasts. Food vendors offered dishes made with locally sourced ingredients, including bread baked with Bennett farm wheat. Musicians played traditional folk tunes on a small stage, the melodies carrying across the fields on the gentle breeze. James moved through it all, answering questions, solving minor logistical issues, and occasionally pausing to marvel at what his farm had become. Everywhere he looked, people were engaged and interested, connecting with the land and its history in ways he could never have anticipated. In the afternoon, the documentary film was screened in the barn, which had been temporarily converted into a rustic theater with hay bale seating. James slipped in at the back, wanting to see the audience reaction without being immediately recognized. The film beautifully captured the farm's transformation, interweaving the history of the Bennett family with the impact of Claire's artwork and the development of the Farm Preservation Trust. Watching his own story unfold on screen, James felt a complex mix of emotions. There was pride, of course, in what had been accomplished, but also a deeper satisfaction in seeing his family's legacy preserved and celebrated. The film didn't shy away from the challenges he had faced, the very real threat of losing everything. but it framed those struggles within the broader context of the pressures facing family farms across the country, turning his personal story into a microcosm of a national issue. As the film ended, and the audience applauded, James quietly slipped out, needing a moment alone before rejoining the festival. He walked to the fence line, his feet automatically taking him to the spot where Claire had first set up her easel. The wheat fields stretched before him, golden and ready for harvest, their beauty now acknowledged and celebrated, but their purpose unchanged. To produce food, to connect people to the land, to continue a tradition that stretched back generations. "There you are." Claire's voice came from behind him. "I've been looking everywhere. The museum curator wants to speak with both of us about the winter exhibition." James turned to find Claire approaching, her face flushed with excitement from the day's events. "The film was good," he said. "Really captured everything that's happened." Claire nodded. "Dr. Wright did an amazing job." And the audience response was incredible. She came to stand beside him at the fence, both of them looking out over the fields. "Remember the first time I was here? I had no idea what would come of it. Just knew there was something special about this place, this light. And I thought you were just some random artist who'd be gone the next day," James admitted with a smile. "Never imagined all of this." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the afternoon light played across the wheat. In the distance, the sounds of the festival continued. Music and laughter and the steady hum of conversation, a celebration of everything the farm had become. "We should get back," Claire said eventually. "People will be looking for you. You're the star of the show, after all." James shook his head. "The farm is the star. I'm just its caretaker." "A very good one," Claire said softly. "Your father would be proud, James. You've not only preserved his legacy, you've ensured it will continue." As they walked back toward the center of the festival, James reflected on her words. It was true, in a way he couldn't have foreseen a year ago. By opening himself to change, by allowing his farm to evolve while maintaining its essential character, he had secured its future in a way that simply holding on to the past never could have done. The rest of the festival day passed in a whirlwind of activity. By sunset, as the last visitors departed and the cleanup crews began their work, James felt a bone-deep exhaustion mixed with profound satisfaction. Standing on the porch of the farmhouse, watching as the golden light of evening transformed his fields one more time, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, the Bennett farm would endure, not just as a working agricultural operation, but as a place of meaning and connection for the wider community. The actual harvest began the day after the festival. James and his small crew, working from dawn till dusk to bring in the crop, while conditions were perfect. The yield was excellent, just as he had predicted, the quality of the grain exceptional. With Claire's help, he had arranged direct sales to several specialty bakeries and restaurants, ensuring premium prices for a significant portion of the harvest. As the last of the wheat was brought in, James allowed himself a moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. This was what farming was all about, ultimately. Working with the land to produce something of value, something that would nourish others. All the rest, the art and the education programs and the media attention, were valuable additions, but this, the successful harvest, remained the heart of the enterprise. That evening, in what had become a tradition, James hosted a harvest dinner for everyone who had worked on the farm. It was a simple meal, but abundant, featuring bread made from the farm's wheat and produce from neighboring farms. Claire had helped prepare the food, and as they all sat around the long table set up on the porch, James looked at the faces of friends, old and new, all connected now to the ongoing story of Bennett Farm. After the guests had departed, James and Claire remained on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The night was cool but not cold, perfect for sitting outside with a glass of local wine and conversation that meandered comfortably between practical matters and philosophical reflections. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Claire said after a comfortable silence. "After the season's exhibition, I mean." James looked at her curiously. "You have another series in mind?" Claire nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'm interested in exploring the human element more deeply. The relationship between people and the landscapes they inhabit and shape. She hesitated, then added, "I've been offered a residency in New Zealand next year. 6 months documenting agricultural landscapes that have been shaped by different cultural traditions." "New Zealand?" James repeated, surprised by the unexpected pang he felt at the thought of Claire being gone for so long. "That sounds like an amazing opportunity." "It is," Claire agreed, "but I find myself reluctant to be away from here for so long." She looked out at the darkened fields, her profile illuminated by the soft light spilling from the farmhouse windows. "This place has become important to me, not just as a subject for my art, but personally." There was something in her voice, a vulnerability that made James look at her more closely. Over the months, their friendship had deepened into something he valued deeply, but had never fully defined, even to himself. Claire's presence on the farm had become so natural, so right, that he had avoided examining too closely what it might mean to him if she left. "The farm will still be here when you get back," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "And so will I." Claire turned to face him directly. "Is that what you want? For me to come back?" The question hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. James found himself at a crossroads, one more unexpected turn in a year full of them. He could give a casual answer, maintain the comfortable ambiguity of their relationship, or he could acknowledge what he had been gradually recognizing: that Claire had become essential to him, not just as a catalyst for the farm's transformation, but as a person whose presence in his life he cherished. "Yes," he said simply. "I want you to come back. To the farm. To me." Claire's face softened, relief and something deeper showing in her eyes. "Good, because I've realized that as much as I want to explore other landscapes, other places, this is where I want to return to, this farm. You." The admission changed something between them, a shift as subtle yet significant as the gradual change of seasons. They talked long into the night, about feelings that had developed slowly amid the more dramatic transformations happening around them, about possibilities for a shared future that neither had anticipated when Claire first stopped to sketch a sunset over wheat fields. As the weeks passed and winter approached, bringing with it the quieter season on the farm, James and Claire's relationship deepened. They worked together on finalizing the text for the book that would accompany her season's exhibition, their professional collaboration now enriched by their personal connection. Claire continued to divide her time between the farm and her Chicago studio, but spent increasingly longer periods at the farmhouse itself rather than the artist's cottage, her presence bringing warmth and new energy to spaces that had felt empty for too long. The season's exhibition opened in Chicago in early December, drawing critical acclaim and further cementing Claire's reputation as one of the most significant landscape artists of her generation. James, attending the opening reception, found himself more comfortable in the art world than he would have thought possible a year earlier. He spoke easily with critics and collectors, his genuine connection to the land depicted in Claire's paintings bringing authenticity to conversations that might otherwise have seemed pretentious or abstract. As winter settled over the farm, bringing snow that transformed the fields into a glistening white expanse, James and Claire made plans for the coming year. She would go to New Zealand for her residency, a shorter period than originally proposed, and he would visit for a month in the middle of her stay. In her absence, the farm would continue its educational programs, hosting winter workshops on sustainable agriculture and planning sessions for the next growing season. On a crisp, clear January morning, James stood at the fence line, the same spot where everything had begun. The fields lay dormant under a blanket of snow, resting until spring would bring another cycle of planting and growth. Beside him, Claire worked on a winter study for the final painting in her Seasons series, her breath forming clouds in the cold air as she captured the stark beauty of the landscape in its quietest season. Looking out over his land, James felt a deep sense of contentment. The farm had survived its crisis, not by clinging rigidly to the past, but by embracing thoughtful change, by finding new ways to express and sustain the values that had always been at its heart. And he had found something he hadn't even known he was missing: a partnership that enhanced rather than diminished his connection to the land and its legacy. The sun broke through the winter clouds, casting long shadows across the snow-covered fields, and illuminating the scene with a clear, crystalline light. Claire paused in her work, looking up to study the changing conditions, her artist's eye always alert to the subtle shifts in light and atmosphere. "Perfect," she murmured, mixing a new color on her palette. "Absolutely perfect." James nodded, understanding she meant not just the light or the composition, but everything. The farm, their work, the life they were creating together. Standing there in the winter sunshine, the land stretching out before them, dormant but alive with potential, he knew she was right. It wasn't perfect in the sense of being without challenges or difficulties, but perfect in a deeper way, in being exactly what it needed to be in this moment, true to its own nature while open to growth and change. The Bennett farm would continue, evolving with each season, each year, each generation, but always maintaining its essential character as a place where human care and natural forces work together to create something both useful and beautiful. And James, like his father and grandfather before him, would be its caretaker, not alone now, but with a partner who saw its value with the same clarity he did, though through different eyes. As the sun climbed higher in the winter sky, casting the snow-covered fields in brilliant light, James and Claire stood side by side, farmer and artist, each seeing the land through their own perspective, but sharing a common appreciation for its enduring significance. The farm stretched out before them, a canvas painted anew each season, a living legacy that connected past to future, a place of both work and wonder. And in that moment, with the winter sun warming their faces despite the cold air, with the land resting before the renewal of spring, with possibilities spreading out before them like the fields themselves, James knew that allowing Claire to sketch his farm that summer evening had indeed changed his life forever, in ways neither of them could have imagined. But the change had not diminished what mattered. It had preserved and enhanced it, bringing new meaning and vitality to a legacy that would now continue, stronger for having been threatened, more precious for having almost been lost. The Bennett farm stood as it had for generations, rooted in tradition but reaching toward the future, its golden fields temporarily white with snow but warming already in anticipation of the spring to come, the next turbur, planting, the next harvest, the next chapter in a story that would continue long after those currently writing it had passed into memory. It was a good story, James thought, one worth telling, worth preserving, worth sharing with others who might find in it their own inspiration. Beside him, Claire added one final stroke of color to her winter study, capturing the exact quality of light on snow that made this moment unique, never to be repeated in exactly the same way. "There," she said softly. "That's it." James nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. That was it indeed, the essence of the place in this particular moment, preserved now in art, as the farm itself would be preserved in reality, changing with the seasons, but consistent in its core identity, adaptable, enduring. A living example of how the past could inform the present without constraining the future. As they turned back toward the farmhouse, walking together through the snow-covered fields, James felt a profound sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, with exactly the right person by his side. The farm had survived its crisis and emerged stronger, not unchanged, but authentically itself, its value recognized and celebrated in ways his ancestors could never have imagined, but would, he believed, have approved of nonetheless. The sun continued to shine brilliantly on the snow-covered fields of Bennett Farm, the land dormant but full of promise, waiting for spring and all the seasons to come, each bringing its own challenges and rewards, its own beauty and purpose in the endless cycle of growth and harvest and renewal that was the true heart of farming, of life itself. And in that ongoing story, in that continuing cycle, James had found not just survival but fulfillment, not just preservation, but renewal. His struggling farm transformed not by abandoning its heritage, but by sharing it, by allowing others to see and appreciate what had always been there. The beauty, the dignity, the enduring significance of this particular piece of earth, and the people who cared for it. As the farmhouse came into view, smoke rising from the chimney against the winter sky, James felt a surge of gratitude for all that had happened, expected and unexpected, planned and unplanned, the seeming coincidences that had led to such profound change. Claire's hand found his as they walked, a small gesture that symbolized a larger truth. They were in this together now, artist and farmer, each bringing their unique perspective to a shared vision of what the farm could be, what life could be. And that, perhaps, was the most unexpected and precious outcome of all. A partnership that enhanced, rather than diminished, individual identity, that celebrated difference while finding common ground, that looked toward the future with hope rather than fear. Seeing in change, not a threat, but an opportunity for growth and renewal. The Bennett farm would continue, evolving with each season, each year, each generation, but always maintaining its essential character as a place where human care and natural forces work together to create something both useful and beautiful. And James, like his father and grandfather before him, would be its caretaker, not alone now, but with a partner who saw its value with the same clarity he did, though through different eyes. That evening, as darkness fell early as it does in winter, James and Claire sat by the fire in the farmhouse living room, discussing plans for the spring planting and Claire's upcoming show. Outside, a light snow began to fall, adding a fresh layer to the already white landscape, nature continuing its own creative work regardless of human plans or perceptions. "I've been thinking," Claire said, looking up from her sketchbook where she had been working on ideas for the New Zealand project. "When I come back from the residency, I want to make this my permanent base, keep the Chicago studio for occasional use, but live here, with you." James felt a surge of joy at her words. "Are you sure? This is a pretty quiet place compared to the city, and winters can be isolating." Claire smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I've never been more sure of anything. This place, this farm, it's become home to me. And you." She reached out to take his hand. "You've become home too." As they sat together, making plans for a shared future neither could have anticipated a year ago, James thought about how sometimes the most profound changes came from the simplest beginnings. A woman asking to sketch his fields at sunset. An act of casual generosity that had set in motion a chain of events transforming not just his farm, but his life. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, covering the dormant fields in a pristine blanket, nature's own canvas awaiting the colors and textures of spring. Inside, by the warmth of the fire, two people whose paths had crossed by chance, but now ran parallel by choice, contemplated the seasons to come, the work to be done, the life to be lived, together on the land that had brought them to each other. The Bennett farm stood as it had for generations, its story continuing, its legacy secure not through rigid preservation of the past, but through thoughtful evolution that honored tradition while embracing change. And in that ongoing story, James had found not just a way to save his farm, but a reason to celebrate it. Not just a means of survival, but a path to fulfillment. His struggling fields transformed into a canvas for both agriculture and art, sustaining body and spirit alike. As the fire burned low and the winter night deepened, stars visible through patches in the clouds, the farmhouse stood warm and welcoming, a light in the darkness, a promise kept. A new chapter beginning in an old and honorable story of humans in the land they tend. A story as ancient as agriculture itself, yet always new with each planting, each harvest, each season of growth and change. And renewal. And so the Bennett farm continued, its golden fields temporarily white with snow, but warming already in anticipation of the spring to come, the next planting, the next harvest. The next chapter in a story that would continue. Generation after generation. A legacy preserved not in amber, but in living, growing, changing reality, as enduring as the land itself and as vital as those who cared for it. A testament to the power of seeing beauty in the everyday and value in what others might discard. A simple farm transformed not by becoming something else, but by being more fully, more consciously, more celebratedly itself. In the quiet of the winter night, with snow falling gently outside and firelight casting warm shadows within, James and Claire continued their conversation, planning and dreaming, their individual visions merging into a shared future that neither could have imagined when their paths first crossed. A future built on respecting the past without being bound by it, on embracing change without losing Ka. Essential character. On finding in collaboration something stronger and more enduring than either could have created alone. And outside, under the winter sky, the fields of Bennett Farm lay dormant but alive with potential, waiting for spring and all the seasons to come, each bringing its own challenges and rewards, its own beauty and purpose in the endless cycle that was the true heart of farming, of art, of life itself. A cycle of growth and harvest and renewal that connected past to future, earth to humanity, struggle to hope, in an ongoing story of resilience and regeneration. A story that had been unfolding on this land for generations and would continue long after those currently part of it had passed into memory. It was a good story, James thought, as he and Claire continued talking late into the night, their plans for the farm and for their life together taking shape in the warm glow of firelight and shared purpose. A story worth telling, worth preserving, worth sharing with others who might find in it their own inspiration, their own encouragement to see beauty in the everyday, value in what endures, hope in what can grow from even the most challenging conditions. The Bennett Farm would continue, its golden fields a living canvas painted anew each season by the combined efforts of nature and human care. Its story enriched now by the intersection of agriculture and art, its legacy secured not through stasis, but through thoughtful evolution that honored the past while embracing the future. A perfect collaboration between Burbalal, tradition, and innovation, between utilitarian purpose and aesthetic appreciation, between the practical wisdom of farming and the transformative vision of art. And in that collaboration, in that ongoing story, James had found not just survival but fulfillment, not just preservation but renewal. His struggling farm transformed not by abandoning its heritage, but by sharing it, by allowing others to see and appreciate what had always been there. The beauty, the dignity, the enduring significance of this particular piece of earth and the people who cared for it. A significance that Claire had recognized that summer evening and captured in her art, setting in motion a chain of events that had changed everything without changing what truly mattered. As the night deepened and the fire burned low, snow continuing to fall softly outside, James and Claire's conversation gradually gave way to comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet profoundly connected. Their individual paths now merged into a shared journey that would unfold season by season, year by year, across the fields of Bennett Farm and beyond. A journey neither could have anticipated, but both now embraced with gratitude and hope, and the quiet certainty that comes from finding, at last, the right place, the right purpose, the right person, with whom to share it all. And so the story continued, not ending, but evolving, as all true stories do, connecting past to present to future in the endless cycle of growth and harvest and renewal that was the true heart of farming, of art, of life itself. A cycle that had been unfolding on this land for generations and would continue, generation after generation. A legacy preserved not in stasis, but in living, changing reality, as enduring as the land itself, and as vital as those who cared for it. A testament to the power of seeing with fresh eyes what has always been there, of finding in collaboration something stronger and more beautiful than either could create alone, of embracing change not as a threat, but as an opportunity for growth and renewal, and the continuation of what truly matters, what truly endures, what truly sustains both body and spirit in the ongoing story of Cain. Humans and the land they tend. A story as old as agriculture itself, and as new as tomorrow's sunrise, over fields ready for planting, for growth, for all the seasons to come.